Welcome back to Appalachia, where we define and defend the greatest region in the country. You know where that is by now. It's Appalachia. I'm Chuck Corr, I'm joined, as always, by my co-host and good friend, and dare I say visionary, Big John Eisner. John, how are you?
I'm doing great. I always get so pumped whenever you hype me up like that. Like you're my hype man, and I feel like I'm running onto the court in Morgantown. I'm ready to dunk it.
Well, I can't wait to see the video of that happening. I'll always be the hype man here. That's my role. We established that.
Yeah, you'll hype me up and I'll touch net. So that'll be pretty good.
All right, audience, be ready for that video to come out very soon. Can't wait. John, today we got a good one. We've got a real good one where we have an interview with Rusty Willims. He is a patient advocate for medical cannabis, and he's also running for the House of Delegates in West Virginia. We're really excited to be talking to him. But first, we have our Appalachians of the Week. This week, John, you found a pretty good one, and I'm excited to tell our listeners about it. The Appalachians, we're going to do plural this time, Appalachians of the Week this week are Louisa and Nikki Snuffer of Charleston, West Virginia. Now, these two ladies wanted to start a family, and so they decided that they would foster children. And if you don't know, and I certainly didn't before looking into this, West Virginia has the highest rate of child removal in the country, and that's where children are removed from unstable homes where the parents are deemed unfit to take care of them. So West Virginia has the highest rate of that in the entire country. A lot of that, apparently, children are removed from their homes due to parental substance abuse, such as opioids. And this family, they started out by adopting 5 kids at once. They said they went from 0 to 5 foster siblings. And they said they traded their 2-door car in for a van and took these kids in. They eventually took in 3 more children, so they had 8 overall. I mentioned one of their children was born dependent on opioids. It's just really just sad and terrible. But they made national news for this, and just how like they've dove headfirst into taking care of these kids who really need a stable home. And you can't imagine a better situation for these kids to be dropped into. And so I think it's just a really great story. We're going to link to it in the show notes, but we want to just give a shout out to Louisa and Nikki. I hope I'm pronouncing her name right. We want to give a shout out to them because that's something that, I don't know about you, John. I cannot imagine just going from no kids one day to 5. That personally sounds terrifying. So I commend them for taking that on and then taking on 8 total. That's crazy.
I can't imagine. I think, Delegate Jason Barrett said it best. He said, "These people are angels living among us." I couldn't agree more. What they've decided to do is put these kids in front of themselves, and I'm thankful for it. I'm sure, obviously, they will grow up and be thankful for it, and we are lucky to have people that are doing this.
Absolutely. God bless them. That's amazing. So I love opening the shows like this, because sometimes we get into these pretty weighty topics. Sometimes we can talk about stuff that maybe kind of sucks in this world, or that's rough, or that's just not fun subject matter, but we want to talk about it. So it's good to have stories like this where we can really open the show up every week with someone that's doing some good, or some people that are doing some good, rather. And so it's good to see that. So hats off to them. So before we get started with our interview with Rusty, John is going to talk about the policy that we came up with when it comes to interviewing candidates for elected office.
Chuck, it's obvious that we all have personal political bias, and ours are well documented. But on this show, we are going to be committed to bringing voices from across the political spectrum, because we want Appalachia to be a place where any legitimate person running for office, it does not matter which side, in Appalachia can come on and talk about the issues. Because of this, Appalachia does not and will not endorse candidates. You will hear our opinions and our critiques, but as a show, we let the candidates speak for themselves.
Perfect. Well said. Well, now that that's out of the way, let's get into our interview. A quick note to our listeners, there is a little bit of microphone feedback on Rusty's end. We don't think it's too distracting, but just keep that in mind that we did do a phone recording, and so the sound quality is not necessarily optimal at certain points. Rusty Willims, he is a live sound engineer, cancer survivor, patient advocate for medical cannabis, and a candidate for the 35th District seat in the West Virginia House of Delegates. Rusty, again, thank you for joining us. Why don't you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and your background and how you came to be doing some of the advocacy work that you're doing today?
Well, I was born and raised here in Nitro, West Virginia. And, to be quite honest with you, advocacy and, political active, I guess my political active life that I'm now completely consumed by was never on my radar. I came up, I'm a musician. I came up through the ranks of, just making art and music. And that's what I wanted my life to be about. And I was working as a tattooer in a small business, loving life, doing something that I absolutely love to do every single day. And in 2012, everything changed. I woke up one morning in excruciating pain and, I felt like I'd been stomped, really, in my sleep. So I woke up and took myself to the hospital, and the emergency room doctor said that he was 99% sure I had testicular cancer and that I was going to have to see a urologist for, confirmation. And he said that could take 7 to 14 days, and I knew things were pretty bad when I woke up the very next morning to a phone call from the urologist saying, you need to get here today. So I went to the urologist, they confirmed it, and, he said that I needed emergency surgery. But at the time, I was tattooing in a small business, and we didn't have medical insurance. So, without medical insurance, emergency surgery does not mean the same thing. They basically, once they told me how bad things were and how crucial it was that I get this tumor removed immediately, the very next thing was, well, how can you pay for it? And while I was making good money tattooing, I couldn't afford to just drop cash on surgery. So I started the process of trying to get coverage, to make that surgery happen. And after it was almost 5.5 weeks of jumping through every possible hoop the bureaucrats could have thrown in my path, I was denied 3 times. Finally, I just, I called a family meeting and told them that I wasn't going to pursue this anymore, that cancer was going to take me out. And, my mom wasn't about to have that for 5 seconds. So she continued looking for a solution, and she came across the West Virginia Catastrophic Illness Commission. And within a week of contacting those people, my surgery was scheduled and, things were back on track. So have my surgery. I'm thinking, cool, they cut this tumor out. I've got 6 weeks recovery time and I can get back to my life. Well, about 4.5 weeks into the recovery time, I woke up again in so much pain I couldn't walk. And this time the pain was in my back. So, we called the doctor and was like, hey, is this normal? He's like, no, you need to come in. So they scanned me again, and that's when they realized that the cancer had spread. In the time that I was fighting bureaucrats, the cancer spread. So, aggressive chemotherapy wasn't something that I was ready to jump into at that point in my life, but they said that was the next step. So I started doing some homework and saw that people all over the world were using cannabis to get through aggressive chemotherapy without having to use pharmaceuticals and all that. So I made the choice to illegally use medical cannabis, and I'm a firm believer that that's what got me through it. I was able to eat. Once the nausea medicine would wear off, I could self-medicate and completely take that nausea and vertigo away within 30 seconds. So, cannabis saved my life. And I looked at it once I was finished with my treatments that, hey, this illegal flower just got me through the most terrible situation I could possibly even imagine. I've got to do whatever I can do to try to end this nonsense prohibition. And that basically put me on the path that I'm on now, man. I've dedicated my entire life to ending prohibition.
Yeah, and thanks for that. That's really helpful context. One of the first questions I wanted to ask you actually relates to your chemotherapy and the pain that you felt. You mentioned things like nausea and some of the other pain and how the medical cannabis helped you with that. I was wondering if you could maybe give us some details as to some of the feelings that you felt, some of the pain, some of the nausea, and walk us through how that helped you so that we can really visualize like what the benefit of the medical cannabis was for you.
No, you know, I had to take, they told me that I had to take one of the most aggressive chemo regimens that they could give a human. So, I knew it was going to be bad from the start, but it turns out nausea, like I thought I knew what it meant to be nauseous and I thought I knew what it meant to be dizzy, but in reality, I had no clue. When that stuff, they'll give you Zofran in the IV, or in the IV, at least that's what they gave me for nausea while they were administering the chemotherapy. And that would keep the nausea at bay for pretty much the entire time they were running the chemo. And then when you get home, it takes about, I don't know, it probably took about an hour after I got home and, everything was good for the day before that medicine started to wear off. But once it does, man, the room would just start spinning. It was almost like, you were drunk. And anything like, as far as the nausea goes, just driving past, because on the route that we had to take from the hospital back home, we passed probably 10 fast food restaurants. And just the smell of one of those restaurants would make me want to puke. And I could come home and, smoke cannabis. And within 30 seconds of one hit, that nausea was gone. And the spinning completely stopped. There was one day in particular, it was embarrassing. I was 33 years old, but they told me that I had to, have someone take care of me pretty much all the time because my immune system was going to be so smashed. And, I was just going to be so weak. So at 33, I had to move back in with my mom and my stepdad. So at their house, you pull in the garage and there's like 3 steps and then a landing and then 3 little steps and another landing and then 3 more steps up to the kitchen. Something on a normal day, you would pop right up those steps in, just a couple seconds. And I got home one day and the nausea was so bad that it took me, a good 3-4 minutes just to get up those steps and get myself back to the room. So I walk outside and, I didn't say anything. I just walked outside and smoked, came back in and turned the TV on. I fired up the Xbox. So my mom comes in the room and she's like, "How are you playing a video game when you couldn't walk 5 minutes ago?" And I told her what I had done. And she's like, "Wow, it really works that well." I mean, but it literally took me from barely being able to open my eyes without throwing up to being able to sit down and play a video game in less than 5 minutes. So, as far as the side effects of chemotherapy, I personally don't know how people get through it without cannabis. Unless you're taking fistfuls of pharmaceuticals, which, just for me, that wasn't an option. I wasn't about to do that.
Rusty, how did you originally learn that cannabis could help you through this?
Google. Yeah. Now I wasn't a stranger to cannabis. I had used cannabis recreationally before, so I knew what to expect. But, I say it all the time. I thought that the term medical cannabis and that argument was just a way that the activist community, I thought it was basically a tool they were using to end prohibition, which I was completely cool with because I've always thought, prohibition is a civil rights issue. We can talk about that a little more later. But prohibition should have never happened in the first place. So I'm like, whatever you guys need to do to right these wrongs, I'm in. But until I saw it for myself, firsthand, how quickly it worked as a medicine, there was no way I could understand exactly how beneficial that plant was until that situation happened to me.
Yeah. How difficult was it for you to get access? You said you had to use it illegally. So how difficult was it for you to actually be able to procure it?
It wasn't easy. And I tell you what, it's a humiliating feeling when you are, you know, trying to acquire a flower to get you through cancer treatments. I mean, it was humiliating to have to duck and dodge and, worry about, well, am I going to get caught, or what's going to happen if I get caught? Somebody fighting cancer, the last thing they should be worried about is, losing their freedom for using a natural medicine that's making them feel better. So, it wasn't the most pleasant of situations, but, I did what I had to do.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that I think a criticism that comes up sometimes is some folks cite CBD as being, the medicinal fix or something like this, rather than legalizing full-blown cannabis. And I think in the past you've said CBD alone was not sufficient. Why is that? And if you could explain that a little bit to our listeners.
Well, cannabis works best when you have all of those cannabinoids working together. The medical community refers to it as the entourage effect, and the THC actually works best for inflammation. Now, CBD does have medical benefits. I'm not going to deny that, but from the readings that I've done and the research that we've done, you need the THC for that plant to really, really do its thing. Now, there's also a point that, I bring up a lot, but I think it gets missed in the conversation. To me, there's something very therapeutic in that euphoric feeling that you get from cannabis. You know what I mean? When you're going through chemotherapy, you're you're aware of the fact that you're dying. Right? Like you can feel it. I basically describe it as like somebody piping kerosene through your system. It's not pleasant. It's not necessarily painful, but there's a very, I don't know the correct way to put it into words. There's a very prominent burn that you feel from the second they start running that. And, it can be a little heavy to have to process that thought, because you're trying to, get through the treatments. You're trying to stay positive. They tell you that attitude is one of the most important things, as far as combating cancer. You're supposed to stay positive because you truly feel yourself dying. And that little bit of euphoric feeling that you get from the THC cannabinoid, I think is absolutely crucial. When you've got somebody who is feeling like, like they're dying and pretty much hopeless, why would you want to deny them something that would make them feel a little better, or make them shift their thoughts to where, they're not focused on the fact that they're dying for an hour? To me, there's something very therapeutic in that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those are very legitimate questions that I think probably don't get asked enough when you get into the conversations with folks who are against it. So I want to pivot a little bit here, because I think something that really is interesting, at least to me and John, is your advocacy surrounding medical cannabis, particularly in West Virginia. You had mentioned that you weren't really politically active before your cancer diagnosis. Is that correct?
Yeah, I've always followed the process, and I've always, kept up to speed as to what our lawmakers were doing. But as far as like getting, getting involved in the process and actually trying to change a law, I didn't know the first thing about it. Of course, like I say, I've always studied the issues, and I knew what our representatives were about, but I had no idea, how to go about going up to the Capitol and actually instituting some policy change. And so it's been fascinating to, to kind of learn how the sausage is made. Because that's something that, at least when I was in school, you get the real generic schoolhouse rocks, how a bill becomes a law situation, right. But they don't tell you exactly how much work goes into changing policy. I was told when I first started advocating that a good idea can take 7 to 10 years to pass through the legislature. And, I thought that was kind of crazy when I first heard it, but once I got, really into it, that's about accurate.
Yeah, that's enough to, I think, turn a lot of people off to the process just with the length of it. And so I want to maybe dial back just a little bit here, and I was wondering if you could talk to us about how you first got involved in those advocacy efforts on medical cannabis.
Well, when I finished my last treatment, I was angry. I should have been the most grateful, thankful person on earth, right? I had just, the way I look at it, I had just crawled my way out of hell. Um, I should have been the most thankful person that you could meet, but I wasn't. I was angry. I was angry at the fact that, I had to feel like a criminal to get the medicine that made me feel better, and to me, that was just absolutely unacceptable. And I told the nurses, there was one specific day I was laying in the bed getting chemo, and it was a really bad day. My immune system was completely run down. I had actually just spent 9 days quarantined in the hospital. As soon as I got out from quarantine, I had 1 day to rest at the house, and then it was right back to a week's worth of chemotherapy. So, I'm pretty angry about it. And I told the nurse, I said, if I survive this, I'm going to the Capitol and I'm going to pick a fight. And she laughed. She's like, what are you talking about? And I said, just exactly what I said. I'm going to pick a fight. There's no reason that I should be, or anybody should be going through this without safe legal access to cannabis. And I'm going to do everything I can to see to it that they have it. And that's basically the mentality that I came out of treatment with. So I had no idea what I was doing. I just started going to the Capitol. If I woke up and I felt like, if I felt physically able to go do it, I would drive to the Capitol and I would basically go talk to anybody that would listen. And there was no organization. I didn't know what to do or who to reach out to. So I just started looking online, and I saw that Citizens Action Group in Charleston was throwing a citizen lobby training. So I started going to those, and just trying to learn how this process works. And at the time, there were two gentlemen pounding the halls at the Capitol every day, Jesse Johnson and Chris Yeager. And I come to find out that's what they were working on. They were up there trying to get medical cannabis legislation passed. And, once I found that out, we all just started talking and networking together and sharing resources and sharing information. And, I've just figured it out.
Tell us a little bit, because I'd like to show kind of the change in what we're seeing today. So tell us a little bit about in 2014 when you're advocating for medical marijuana in West Virginia. Talk to us a little bit about the landscape of the issue there. What did you see in the Capitol? How did people treat you at that time? And I believe 2014, that's the start of the change in West Virginia, where you start to see a more conservative legislature really kind of ramping up on that side. So kind of tell us about, what you saw in the first year or so of, advocating for medical marijuana.
Oh, it was, to take words from my buddy Don, it was like we were charging straight up a copperhead infested hill, man. They didn't want to talk to us. I had lawmakers tell me, that if I didn't shut my mouth on this issue, I was probably going to end up in jail. We heard everything. Now, when I first started advocating, I think it's important to let people know, I didn't go up there advocating for a medical cannabis law. I wasn't advocating for medical cannabis at all, although, it had just saved my life medically. When I started researching why cannabis was prohibited in the first place, anybody with Google in 5 minutes time can see that the roots of cannabis prohibition are deeply seated in racist soil, right? My mind was blown when I was reading quotes from, Harry Anslinger when prohibition really kicked off. He was the architect, and I'm just like, wow, this is disgusting. Because you could easily make the argument that now these laws are doing nothing but perpetuating institutional racism and slavery, and we have evidence from that now. We've got 11 states where it's fully legal for anybody 21 and over to go into a dispensary and buy whatever they want. 33 states, I believe, now are medically legal, and I think it's 22 or 23 have decriminalized. But nationally, nonviolent cannabis arrests in minority communities and in economically depressed white communities are going up. So I started advocating to end prohibition from a social justice lens, and I still feel that way. I was glad that we were able to get a medical bill passed because it moves the ball forward. But our Medical Cannabis Act doesn't go anywhere near far enough, not just with accessing medicine for patients, but it doesn't go far enough to deal with the root of the problem. But when you're talking about racial disparities in nonviolent cannabis arrests and all that stuff in West Virginia, you get told really quickly, well, shut up. Nobody wants to hear that. If you're going to talk about this, talk about the money that can be made, but don't talk about the racial aspect of it because no one wants to hear it. And that makes me sick to my stomach to know that we have sitting lawmakers who feel that way. So, they basically looked at me like, what the hell is this guy talking about? I don't want to hear this. And they were very dismissive. Now, fast forward, 3 years, 2017 legislative session, when we were able to get the Medical Cannabis Act passed, some of those same lawmakers that would tell me, I don't want to talk about this, were walking around with cannabis leaf lapel pins on their suits. So it has been really interesting to see the change in attitudes up there at the State House. And I think that the grassroots community, they give me and they give Senator Ojeda and they give Mike Pushkin and, the people who've been out here the loudest a lot of credit as far as the passage of the Medical Cannabis Act. And I feel like they give us too much credit because they didn't pass the Medical Cannabis Act because they thought I had a compelling story. You know what I mean? They didn't pass the Medical Cannabis Act because Richard Ojeda got up every day on the floor and hammered them on this issue. They didn't, if they were going to do this because it was the right thing to do, in 2016, we had a sitting delegate from Monongalia County, Delegate Bill Flanagan, who was actually going through radiation as a lawmaker and was using cannabis to get through radiation. And he stood up and gave one of the most passionate speeches on the issue that I've ever heard. And they wouldn't go to bat for him. If they're not going to do the right thing by one of their own colleagues, it was, crazy for me to think that they were going to do the right thing from, just some citizen coming up there and telling them what's up. The reason we got the Medical Cannabis Act passed was because you couldn't walk down the hallway without those phones just ringing in every office. I would walk down the Senate halls and there were secretaries that would come out and they're like, Mr. Williams, call the dogs off, please. The phones are ringing so much we can't get anything done. And I would tell them, I'm like, get your senator to legalize cannabis and those phones will stop ringing. But until then, sorry, this is just what's up. But that grassroots movement, that influx of calls and emails, that's why we got the Medical Cannabis Act passed. So I think that the pressure the people put on the lawmakers that's what's really been responsible for the change in attitudes at the State House.
Now, who were the types of people that were making those calls? Were it just like folks that you had organized through CAG? Was it just like regular folks, people who had benefited from cannabis before? What was the type of constituency?
Oh, it was, people from all walks of life. Basically what we did, teamed up with Danny Bragg at West Virginia Green is the New Black, right? It was, at the time, it was just a Facebook page. And he was like, we've got to control the messaging. So what we did was we contacted everyone in West Virginia that ran a pro-cannabis page and, basically formed a network. So if I'm at the Capitol at 10 in the morning and I know that the Medical Cannabis Act is hung up in, the Senate Judiciary Committee, what I would do was type up a post and, rather than just saying, hey, the bill's in Senate Judish, call your lawmakers, and putting that out there, we would put every single member of the committee with their office phone numbers, basically doing the work for people. So all they had to do was, call the number that they saw on the screen. They didn't have to look anything up. That we took all the work out. We took the work away and just did it for them, and that worked. People would see that and they're like, okay, well, I'll call. So we had, people from all walks of life. Doctors, lawyers. Actually, one of the first people that reached out to me after the Medical Cannabis Act was passed was a doctor, thanking me for my advocacy. They know this is the right thing to do. I like to say that cancer never asked me if I was a Republican or Democrat when it showed up and tried to take me out, right? Like, no matter how much they want this to be a partisan issue, it's not, and it never will be. It wasn't hard to get the people mobilized, because people from all walks of life agree that cannabis prohibition is long past due for reform.
Absolutely. And before we kind of go into the current state of affairs with cannabis in West Virginia, it sounds like that grassroots mobilization was probably pretty key in passing it. Do you see there being any motivation or political will to go further on that issue, to maybe look into recreational cannabis in West Virginia?
Unfortunately, no. I think there's a lot of political posturing going on right now on the right. There's one of the more prohibitionist delegates just introduced legislation to remove cannabis from pre-employment drug screening, which, I think is a great idea. That should happen. But it was double referenced, and the first committee it was referenced to was Tom Fast, Committee on Industry and Labor. And then after that, it goes to John Schott's Judiciary Committee. And both of those guys are prohibitionists. That bill's not going to move an inch. So, Mike Pushkin introduced a bill, I believe it came out Friday, to allow patients to grow limited amounts of cannabis on their own. And that bill was triple referenced. And, for folks that don't understand how the sausage is made, when a bill comes out, when it's introduced, it'll typically have, it's got committee references. Now, bills that they want to pass will be single referenced. Bills that they, may be into the idea, but not really sure. Sometimes they'll double reference them. But if your bill comes out with 3 committee references, it's dead on arrival. They don't want that bill to move. So, as far as legislation this session, I'm hoping that we can at least get flower amended to the Medical Cannabis Act as an acceptable delivery form. And I'm also hoping that we can get the list of conditions expanded. But as far as major moves on decriminalization or legalization, as much as I hate to say it, it's so hyper partisan up there. If the people of West Virginia want cannabis to be legalized, then they're going to have to flip the House and the Senate. They need to focus on the election, get behind pro-cannabis candidates, go out and knock on doors, make phone calls, do anything you can for those candidates to make sure they win, because with the makeup of the legislature right now, it's not happening.
Yeah, that's interesting. I want to kind of come back to that, but first, why don't we talk about the current state of affairs when it comes to medical cannabis in West Virginia? The law itself was passed several years ago, but the regulatory framework has been slow to be implemented. I was wondering if you could give us a rundown of where things are right now and your current insight on that.
Well, they opened up the permitting process on December 18th, and it closes down on February 18th. So we'll know here real soon how many people have applied to grow and process and dispense. Now, how long it takes the DHHR to decide who will be awarded those 10 permits, that's hard to say. I personally believe that once the permitting window has closed, we're probably 4 to 6 months away from finding out exactly who will be issued those permits. And then once the permits are issued, we're at least another 18 months from, everything being up and running and cannabis being available on dispensary shelves for patients to purchase. So as of right now, my personal thoughts, I think we're still 2 years away from being from patients being able to access. It's really frustrating to see how slowly this program has been implemented.
So you talked about the current state, kind of where we are. The one thing I want to know, and obviously when we talk on this show, we don't just talk about West Virginia, but being from here, and I still live here, obviously. So it is kind of one of the forefront topics. But I kind of want to know, Rusty, if you could either avoid or take something from another rural state, such as something like in Appalachia, like Kentucky, Tennessee, anywhere like that, is there somewhere that you're looking to mimic medical cannabis or recreational cannabis legislation on, or is there somewhere that you're wanting to kind of look at their legislation and say we need to avoid that?
Well, there's a lot of things we need to avoid. As a matter of fact, I personally don't think, and this is including all of the legal states, be it medical or full legalization, I don't think any of them have got it right yet. I think Illinois, as far as the legal states, I like what they're doing. I like the social justice part of what they're doing. Now, their taxes are so crazy on legal cannabis up there that I don't understand how their dispensaries are going to make it. I believe that their taxes on cannabis are over 30%, and I'm not exactly sure what the percentage is, but I know that's more than 30. So, they're looking at this as like, let's make as much money as we possibly can as quickly as we can. But they're looking at putting those proceeds back into helping rebuild communities that have been disproportionately affected by the war on drugs. And, I think that that's the right way to go about it. One of the things that I find most frustrating, and this is including West Virginia with our Medical Cannabis Act, if you have ever been arrested for a nonviolent cannabis offense, you can't participate in the industry. And that means even as like a bud tender or an entry-level position, even a salesperson at a dispensary, you can't participate. And to me, that's backwards. We've been throwing people in jail and ruining lives for nonviolent cannabis use since 1937. And now we're gonna tell people that have had their lives completely just destroyed from being arrested or whatever. We're going to tell them they can't participate in the industry, but we're going to let a bunch of it is what it is. We're going to let a bunch of rich old white guys come in here and get even richer. To me, that's disgusting.
Tell me a little bit about that, Rusty, because we did an episode. Our last episode was on cannabis, and one thing that I talked about was the high cost of the permit to actually grow, and even the cost of licensing fees in West Virginia and other states. Tell me a little bit about what it looks like in states like West Virginia to become part of the industry. What's difficult about it, and what would you what needs to be changed?
Well, me personally, I have a real problem with the way they set up the business part of the Medical Cannabis Act. We had an opportunity to provide small businesses and, small West Virginia farmers a tool to lift themselves and their communities out of poverty. But instead of doing that, we handed the industry to 10 entities. There are going to be 10 companies that control our entire medical cannabis industry from seed to sale. I've heard folks say, well, there are going to be 100 dispensaries statewide, so, maybe I can get one of those dispensary licenses. Well, those 100 dispensary permits are going to be issued to 10 people. So, if I'm issued one, I can have 10 locations. If you're issued a permit, you can have 10 locations. But they've cut the small farmer and they cut the little guy right out of the game. They did what West Virginia always does. We're going to let out-of-state companies come in here, take another industry from West Virginians and take the profits and run right out the door with them. And, to me, that's just fundamentally screwed up. My thoughts were, why don't we make the permitting process comparable to the hemp industry? When our hemp industry kicked off in West Virginia, it was, I think, $100 for your permit, and then $5 an acre for each acre you were growing hemp. If they wanted to kick it up to $1,000, I don't have a problem with $1,000 permits, but they could have, to me, what would have been a better system would put square footage limitations on the size of the grows, so nobody could get too big. Make the permits affordable for West Virginia small farmers to get in the game, and let the free market dictate who sinks and who swims. That to me would have been the fair way to go about this, but instead they went the corporate monopoly route. So again, it all goes back to political will. That's why I can't stress enough that if folks care about this, especially folks who want to get into the industry, the only course of action that we have is to get behind pro-cannabis candidates who are looking at this through the right lens and do everything we can for them to get them elected. Because, the legislators we have in office right now, they're perfectly fine with that corporate monopoly. They're totally fine. They think it's a good idea. I've actually had lawmakers say, well, Rusty, we want to make sure the right people are getting into this industry. And to me, that's an insult. Why can't West Virginians be the right people? I mean, when you look at black market cannabis, I'm not afraid to say it, West Virginians grow some of the best cannabis on earth. I've been all over the country. I've been to a lot of the legal states as far as, going out and seeing what they're doing and trying to just figure this game out. And the best cannabis I've ever seen in my life was grown in Putnam County. So, we have an opportunity where we can bring these people out of the shadows and let them have something, let them build something here. We can create a sustainable new way of doing things here for our people. But not if we're letting the out of state big boys come in here and run us out of the game.
It's interesting you mention that, because when you look at this on its face, it shouldn't be a partisan issue. Because, and I'd like to get your thoughts on this. I mean, when you look at the current framework and how things are set up, that bullies out the potential for small businesses and for individual entrepreneurs to participate in this industry.
Yeah, I mean, it's backwards, and you hit the nail on the head. This shouldn't be a partisan issue, and even if it was, the Republicans, they run for office on the platform of smaller government, less regulation. Let's let the free market do its thing, And I've got some really good friends, and I'm not saying that every Republican in our legislature is against cannabis legalization. As a matter of fact, I think if we could get cannabis, if we could get a full legal bill to the floor to be voted on, there's a good chance that we could get it passed, but it's not going to get past leadership. They're adamantly against it. I would love to be able to tell you why they're adamantly against it, but the real hardline prohibitionists, they don't even want to talk about the issue. So, but you're right. It shouldn't be a partisan issue. I say it every time. I've already said it once in this conversation, but I was never asked my party affiliation before cancer showed up and tried to take me out. Republicans and Democrats are all suffering from the same conditions that cannabis can benefit. We are all living in an economically depressed state. The Republicans and Democrats alike are both trying every day to figure out proper solutions to get West Virginia back on track. And here we are as representatives of the cannabis community saying, here's your sign, come this way. And for some reason they don't want to do it. It's beyond comprehension. We are literally starving in the belly of a whale.
Rusty, I want to close up here. I know that as somebody running for office, this isn't the only issue that you care about. Where can people find out more about you and your campaign?
They can find me on Facebook at Rusty Williams for House. You can find me online at rustywilliamswv.com. And just hit us up on social media. I'm very accessible. If you want to message me directly and ask me about any issue, I am more than willing to have these conversations. That's another part of this that I feel very fortunate, because in the time that I've spent advocating for cannabis, I've had a front row seat to the entire process. It's not just cannabis that I've been up there paying attention to. I'm a very, very strong supporter of labor and organized labor and unions. That to me, like, unions are the backbone of West Virginia. I'm a strong supporter of women and women's health. Cannabis isn't just the only issue that I'm interested in. So yeah, I appreciate that question. And again, if anybody has a question about any issue, I am not afraid to have these conversations, and I'm not going to run from any conversation. So yeah, feel free to reach out whenever.
We'll link to your social media pages and your website in our show notes as well. Rusty, I want to thank you for joining us and talking to us today. I really appreciate it, and I know that I learned a lot, and I'm sure John did too. And I imagine that our listeners will really enjoy listening to this as well.
I appreciate that, and just one more point. I really want people to research why and how we got to where we are when it comes to cannabis prohibition. Get on Google, check it out. Check out Harry Anslinger. Look up. Check out the Schaefer Commission under the Nixon administration and John Ehrlichman, and just read these things for yourself. Don't take my word for any of this stuff. I always tell lawmakers when I leave their office, I'm like, don't take my word for it. I want you to go and look this up, and I want you to have the same aha moment that I had. And, because it's very eye-opening, and I don't want anyone to take my word for it. Go do the homework, and you'll see it yourself.
I really appreciate you coming on, Rusty. I think that the information that you provide is something that, that needs to be heard. So I really do appreciate that.
Anytime I get the opportunity to talk about cannabis, I'm in. It saved my life. I feel like it's my responsibility. So yeah, thanks again.
That was that was our interview with Rusty. I loved it. I thought it was great, and I thought that there's probably no better voice really to communicate the efforts on the ground with the activist community and with the advocacy community in West Virginia on cannabis. So I was really happy to have him.
Yeah, I learned so much. I mean, I now feel like I wish I could go back to the first episode that we talked about cannabis and put in everything that Rusty said, but thank God we are able to expand the series and we can continue it now even more educated than we were before.
Yeah, absolutely. And we are going to continue it, and we've been in talks with a lot of good people who are interested in contributing to the knowledge base that we put forward on cannabis on this show. So we're excited to dive deeper into that. But that's all the diving we're doing today. What is next is probably I think it's become a real staple of the Appalachia episode universe here, and one that I think a lot of our listeners look forward to. You know what we're talking about. We're talking about that beef, that Kobe beef, that real raw, like, simmer on the stove beef that is unbeefable. Beef, I can't think of any other words to describe beef, so we're just going to go into it. Beef with Big John. Beef with Big John. John, I hear that you've got a good one this week. Why don't you enlighten our fans?
You know those pants that have the buttons on the side that you can just rip off? That's what I'm doing right now. Oh, I had those. Look, before 18 Huskies, I had button pants on the side, ripping them off as I walked into third grade, really frowned upon. But now, as an adult...
I'm just like picturing you with your bowl cut, just like walking in, ripping them off.
Yeah, it's just me. I'm walking in. It's third grade. I'm like, hey, Miss Emerson, I'm ready for math. Rip. Buttons coming off. They're everywhere. And I am rolling. Now, for Beef with Big John, I'm pumped. You should not be, Chuck, because I'm coming after the state in which you have previously lived, Tennessee. I'm coming for him.
There's probably a lot of material there, to be honest.
Well, to be fair, there is. But there's even One bigger that really jumped out to me, and I gotta tell you, it pissed me off, Chuck. And beef with Big John, usually it's like I get angry, but it doesn't really like piss me off. This one pissed me off, Chuck. I can't lie to you. Tennessee's governor, Bill Lee, decided on Friday that he would sign a measure that allows adoption agencies to refuse to place children with same-sex parents.
Boo.
I thought this was 2020. Chuck. Where is Bill Lee? I feel like he just doesn't understand where we are as a country. Well, to be fair, there are some parts that probably would agree with this, but come on. We're at a point now that the stupidity here by a governor to agree with this bill, and the stupidity of the House in Tennessee, because this was previously passed by the state House last April, and it passed the Tennessee Senate earlier this month 20-6. That's a whole lot of bigotry in one room. There was only one Republican, Steve Dickerson, who was the lone Republican who voted against the measure, along with the Senate's 5 Democrats. An additional 5 GOP senators decided that they wouldn't vote either way. To me, first off, they should have voted, and they should have voted no. But second, the fact this has to be so embarrassing for the state of Tennessee. And I know that this is also legislation that's going to be coming up in the West Virginia House as well. Appalachia has got such a terrible stigma when it comes to bigotry. Why the hell would you continue acting as if this is the way of life in Appalachia? Trust me, it is not. I've met so many people that are Republicans, Democrats, whatever, who don't agree with things like this. It is obnoxious, it's embarrassing, and it's hatred. And that's what it needs to be called. You call a spade, and you call this hatred, because that's what it is. You look at something that you don't agree with or that you just don't understand, and you essentially downgrade it to where it's below you, and that's disgusting. It needs to stop. This is a bad look for Tennessee, and this is a bad look for Appalachia. Bill Lee, you should be absolutely ashamed of yourself.
That's a great beef to end this episode on Big John. Let's go ahead and close it out. This has been Chuck Cora and Big John on Appalachia. For more, follow us on the social medias, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. The Instagram's fire. Come join it. Come help lift our Facebook up. It needs some love. Email us at appodlatch@gmail.com and subscribe to us if you're not already on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you find your podcasts. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back next week with more.